How would you define justice?
If you take something, it should be restored,
Right
right?
on, right on.
If you harm someone, then you need to deal with the consequences of that action.
We are advocates for victims, and we have to be. So justice is an equation. Everybody's at the table.
So what people don't realize is that innocent people plead guilty all the time in the criminal legal system.
My return is making sure that that young man come out here and be able to serve the community. And if he don't be able to do that because he's so mad at the world going through prison, we get nothing back. Our money was just used up for nothing.
It is traumatizing to prosecutors every day. And your role is to make sure that the punishment fits the crime.
Thank you for joining us for our final episode of Real Talk About the Town. Justice is complicated. We'll be talking to candidates for Alameda County District Attorney about how individuals are charged and when they can be diverted. We'll have a conversation with Alameda County's Public Defender, whose job it is to stand in the breach and defend those accused. We will be talking with Oakland's Chief of Violence Prevention, whose role is to deploy violence interrupters in our communities to stop violence before it starts. We will also be speaking with a national expert on detention and detention alternatives. And most importantly, we will hear from those who have direct experience in the system, those who have returned home and who are looking to stay free. So as you can see, we have a lot to unpack. So let's get into it. Welcome, Holly Joshi, to Real Talk About the Town. We're excited to have you with us. Looking forward to hearing your experience and your work. I understand you're the Executive Director of the Department of Violence Prevention. So we just wanted to start by asking you to share a little bit about the office, the department, how it interfaces with Oakland Police Department, and how you came into that role.
So the Department of Violence Prevention is actually only 6 years old. So we're the newest City of Oakland department. We were brought about, like so many things in Oakland, right at the intersection of pain and brilliance. Unfortunately, former council member Lynette McElhaney, I'm sure you remember her, she represented West Oakland, Black woman, very powerful. She'd lost her son and another relative to gun violence within about a year's time. And she really began doing a landscape scan of the ecosystem across the country to understand what it is that we need to invest in to have a proactive public health response to gun violence and not just have a police response to gun violence. So our office really bases our work around community violence intervention models. And community violence intervention is a field. It's not, our preferences or what we think we should be doing. It really is based off of a field, and the three main activities of the community violence intervention field is hospital-based response. So, the work of Youth Alive is pretty well known. It really is understanding that after someone has been shot and they're laying up in a hospital bed, that is one of the most vulnerable situations that someone can be in. And if you can send a credible messenger in there who has very similar lived experience, who can show them what it means to get on the other side of cycles of violence, that is a prime opportunity to support someone in turning their life around.
So firearm addiction is definitely field dependent. Me, myself, I was down for like 23 years, but within that 10 years or so, and especially before I started this class, I felt like it was a need for me to, after all this time, get back out here and have another firearm in my possession in case I may have to use it again. And until I started sitting in that circle, having that support from all the men that's talking about that same thing, it was hard, because in prison, they tell you that you're minimizing that you don't say, hey, I had this gun to kill. And as a person that packed a firearm every day, that went through traumas and all these different things that build up that whole tolerance for packing a firearm, I knew that wasn't true. So I started a class in San Quentin based on that, my insight of what it was that I needed to come out here and feel normal. And right now it's been running for 2 years in San Quentin.
District Attorney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the
Urs-
invite.
Yes, it's great to be here with you today. Ursula Jones-Dixon, our Alameda County District Attorney. So tell us what the district attorney does. What is the day-to-day? What are your primary responsibilities? I've learned a little bit through this process, so I know there's much more kind of management than there is direct kind of prosecutorial work. So how would you describe the role?
So, and a district attorney receives information or referrals from citizens or from the police. We look at those cases to see if we can charge them either criminally, some very small civilly, or juvenile cases, right? The DA is required to make sure that victims' voices are heard. Like, I think that's a part of the puzzle because we don't exist but for somebody being victimized. And I think it's important to realize that this starts with somebody alleging that they've been the victim of a crime. So we have a lot of our services that are infused into victims, right? Whether it be the Victim Witness Advocate Program, the Family Justice Center, or even our lawyers, just making sure that victims are heard and we usher them through the process.
I'm sitting here with our Alameda County Public Defender, Brother Brendon Woods, the first African American elected to that office. Is that correct?
Appointed. I'm appointed, but yes, you're correct. The first black person appointed, first person of color in the history of this office.
To sit in that seat.
Correct.
Why don't you start by telling us what is the role of the public defender and what is it about that role that makes you want to sit there?
Sure. So the role of the public defender is to defend people when they're accused of crimes if they cannot afford to pay for counsel. So you often hear the Miranda rights read on TV. If you can't afford an attorney, want to be appointed to you, that is us. I think for me, why it was important for me to do this work was because what I saw growing up in my community, what I saw happening to my family, my own interactions with police officers made it really, really, really important for me to be that person, be that voice, be the person to amplify the voices of people who may be incarcerated, who may be prosecuted.
Pamela Price, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have this opportunity to speak with you. I want to talk to you today about your perspectives on justice and how we stay free in Oakland.
What does accountability look like? And I think that is the role of the district attorney as a minister of justice, is defining for the whole system or for their office, what does accountability look like? And so we were working through that and looking at, you have to look at each individual case, and they're complicated. It's not, particularly where the law changes in the middle of someone's sentence. And there were cases where, probation said this juvenile person who did something really heinous and caused a lot of harm, but he's still a juvenile. And we believe that he still can be rehabilitated. And so those were hard cases because you had families that felt like, no, he should be tried as an adult. But probation is the expert. And so it's important for the public to know that the district attorney needs to be restrained when dealing with juvenile justice.
We do have a lot of diversion programs, and in fact, the DA's office here in Alameda County was at the forefront of creating a lot of those diversion programs, along with some of the people on the bench like Gordon Baranco, other folks. Like, there were all kinds of diversion programs in place. What has taken a bigger kind of chunk of diversion right now is the mental health diversion, the 1001.36. That mental health diversion is by way of statute, and the DA does not have the ability to say, no, we don't want that person in diversion because we think they're dangerous. It's up to the court. That's a change. So there's less authority that we have in that courtroom and less control.
So collaborative courts in Alameda County is determined through essentially a partnership. There are four different actors in it. Yes, the district attorney can refer persons or not, and since we're the funnel through which everyone has to come. But whether someone is eligible for collaborative courts is in fact a collaboration between the district attorney, between behavioral health, between the public defender, and between the courts. And any one of those actors can veto whether or not the person is eligible for that collaborative or diversionary option.
When it comes to diversion or community court or alternatives, that's where it should happen the most, in juvenile court. That's where we should be, and I think we are doing a better job in regards to investing in our youth. But for some reason, there's this switch between like 17 days, 17 years old and 11 months to someone's 18 and 1 day, how they're treated completely different by the system. I mean, there's not much difference in mentality or the way they're living their lives, but that little difference in a month changes things dramatically in regards to how they're treated.
The 18-year-olds and up, it plays out in the way we charge them and then what happens next. So again, if I have an 18-year-old who doesn't have any prior history and then gets caught up with some friends and they get hooked on a robbery or something, right? That's a kid that we want to divert away from the system if possible, right? We want to find a diversion court or find maybe allow him to do some things, pre-plea diversions, all kinds of things. If this is a kid who had 17 cases as a juvenile and now turns 18 and is still doing the same thing, this level of intervention needs to be a little higher because what we were doing on the back end wasn't working, right? So all of it is fact specific. It is why we look very closely at kind of how people have come through systems. When somebody shows up randomly in a criminal justice system at say 27, it always concerns me. Like, how did we get here? Because generally it's not just you turn a certain age and I'm out here, wilding out. No, you were wilding out when you were younger and we weren't able to curb that behavior. So I am looking at what folks have done before, where they are now, what their set of circumstances are. Everything is fact specific.
So when the case or the charge isn't as serious, how are decisions made where diversion becomes an opportunity for someone who's charged with a crime?
Yeah. For juveniles, it's typically with probation in the prosecutor's office. For adults, it's primarily through the courts and the prosecutors. And I guess we as public defenders always advocate for diversion also for our clients, depending on the charge. So it's multiple areas depending on where you are charged and the age of the person and the type of charge.
And so from the public defender's office, are there situations where you have the opportunity to do more than advocate? Like, do you have any skin in the game where your advocacy has to be considered? Like, does it change the outcome?
Absolutely. So I think when I think about diversion courts, where it's probably the most impactful would be misdemeanor diversion and mental health court diversion. I mean, those are two diversion courts that have been very, very successful. And part of the reason why they're successful is the way they were designed, because they pretty much remove prosecutor discretion. They've taken that player out of the decision-making process, because you can guess what that player often says most of the time. It often says no. So it goes right into the hand of the judge to determine whether that person's eligible or not. And we've got to do a lot of work to get them there. For mental health diversion, there's criteria we have to meet. We've got to get an expert normally, got to get a social worker. There's lots of things we have to do to get them there. But once we do that, it's the judge's decision as opposed to the prosecutor's decision. And that program has been really, really successful. And if it was left up to the prosecutor's own devices, there would be people who have mental health issues who would not be getting into that court right now.
In my preparation for this interview, I learned about this term wobbler. What are the factors that the charging DAs take into consideration when they have a wobbler case in front of them?
So what a wobbler is, it's a specific penal code section. That penal code section can either be charged as a misdemeanor or a felony, right?
I see.
And so the way we get to that decision oftentimes is, what's this person's prior criminal history, right? Or if it's something around a theft, how much do they actually steal? All kinds of factors, but they are very fact specific.
I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Randy Saragucci, who's going straight to the source.
Hey, peace to the people. This is Randy with the Brotherhood of Elders Network. We're out here at the Grand Lake Farmers Market, and we're here to talk to the people a little bit about justice. In Alameda County, what institution houses the largest number of people dealing with mental illness?
Ooh.
Is it Highland Hospital? Is it all the psychiatric hospitals? Or is it Santa Rita Jail?
Oh, we know it's Santa Rita Jail, for sure.
Man,
For sure.
Santa Rita Jail, for real. For sure, for sure.
it's your final answer?
That's my final answer. I'll go with that.
Santa Rita Jail, I want to say, unfortunately.
Any given night in Alameda County, What institution houses the largest number of people dealing with mental illness?
Prison,
Well, see,
25%.
George, you fixing the damn fight, brother. You got the
No,
answers here.
no. What we want to talk about is, do you know what's going on in your community?
So hospital-based response is one of our key and core activities. What we call life coaching, which sounds very Bay Area, very Oakland, very, new wave, but is essentially intensive case management models that are client-driven and relationship-based. It's not system-based case management. It's not us telling clients what their milestones need to be. It's us sitting down with clients within the first 45 days of enrollment and mapping out their life goals. And they look different, and so they have to be very individualized. Some clients are telling us, I can't think past just trying to keep myself alive for the next 45 days. So then that becomes what the life goals are. What's the safety plan? Is it to get out of Oakland temporarily? Is it to get out of Oakland long term? Is it to just map out what parts of Oakland you can be in and which people you can be with? Um, so intensive life coaching is another part of our key activity. And then of course, violence interruption, or what people know as street outreach. So teams of violence interrupters who are from Oakland, who have deep relationships, who've again gotten on the other side of being involved in group or gang violence, who were formerly criminal justice involved themselves, really keeping their eyes and ears to the street. And by the street now, with the younger generation, it's also social media. It's also rap beef. It's all of that, staying on the pulse and the cutting edge of what is happening and what conflicts are brewing and bubbling up, and trying to intervene using your relationships before those conflicts turn violent. Those are the three key activities. And the way that the department is structured is I have a direct practice team made up of violence interrupters and life coaches that are city staffers that are a deployable resource to me. And then we also fund 21 community-based organizations who also have violence interrupters and life coaches, so that we form an ecosystem of support in the city.
Brother David Muhammad.
Yes, sir. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. We get the opportunity to sit down, chop it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
And actually people are out there watching.
Yes, sir. Born and raised in Oakland, California. I got connected to both a teacher at Oakland Tech as well as an organization called the Omega Boys Club. And the Omega Boys Club was known then as a radio show on KMEL with street soldiers, but they had a motto, was from the jailhouse to the schoolhouse. They help young people who had been locked up to go to college, and that's what happened. They paid for me to go to Howard University, best university on the planet. And I actually studied journalism there. I always joke, I don't know how I got involved in this stuff. But to be honest, it was a direct connection. I was teaching writing workshops in juvenile detention. And eventually, in the same facility that I had once been in, I was teaching writing workshops after finishing college. And that got me into the work of the youth justice system.
Here in California, we no longer have a state juvenile department. And I know you played some key roles in pushing that over the finish line. Can you just give us a little bit of that history?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually quite an extraordinary victory that is not told as much, is not celebrated as much. So when I started working in and around the youth justice system about 1997, there were 10,000 youth in California Youth Authority, the state juvenile justice system. So in youth prison. What we never talk about, there was another 10,000 on youth parole. Youth parole got abolished years before the youth authority was closed. So there were 10,000 young people. That does not include the thousands of youth that were in every individual county lockup. This was just in the state system. And today there's zero, because that state system doesn't exist. But what happened, there was a lot of advocacy, and I was proud to be a part of that for many years. We did a lot of work inside the system. When I worked at the Mentoring Center, we both advocated for the change of the system, but also worked with young people in the system. And there was a number of challenges. You had guards beating youth. You had youth dying in facilities, both committing suicides, getting beaten to death. You had a bunch of controversies, and the San Jose Mercury News did a series on the problems with the system. You had legislation to try to reduce the system. All of this culminated in ultimately the massive reduction and then eventual closing. And so now California went from 10,000 youth in the system to zero statewide. But even if you just take Alameda County, so I was also part of a advocacy, something that kind of got Van Jones' start when he was just a local advocate. But many others of us were involved in that fight to not build the largest per capita juvenile detention center in the country right here in Alameda County. And that advocacy won. There was also some NIMBY in Dublin where it was going to be built that had helped push it across the finish line. But that was not built. It was going to be a 500 and I believe 40 bed facility. Instead, they built a 360 bed facility. Today, there is less than 60 youth in that facility. And what the Bay Area did, what California did, is what the nation did, right? So in the last 20 years, there's been a 74% reduction in youth incarcerated in America. That is unbelievable. Had you told me when I started this work in the mid to late 90s that we would have a near 80% reduction while having a reduction in youth crime, right? So you didn't have some explosion in youth crime just because there's so many fewer youth locked up. I would have told you we spiked the ball, victory. And so it is a victory, but we still have a lot of work yet to do.
I'm curious to know, how do you use data to identify which areas of the city you need to focus on? And how do you know when you're in the right area? How do you prioritize where you deploy your staff and your team?
Yeah. So first, let me just say that the City of Oakland's Department of Violence Prevention was very much modeled after the successes that were happening in Richmond. So Devone Boggins and Sam Vaughn and all the work that they were able to do to significantly reduce Richmond's violence is very inspirational, and we look to them consistently as partners in the work. The way that we use data is twofold. The mayor's office calls a weekly shooting review for a focused deterrence partnership approach in the city of Oakland. So every week I'm going into the mayor's office. The mayor's office is there. The Oakland Police Department is there. Probation is there. Faith-based leaders. And I'm listening to what the criminal justice analysis is of the shootings and homicides for that week. They have a particular lens. They have a particular analysis of what they think were the causes of that shooting or that homicide. And it's important for me to understand what that is. I then take that information back to my team of violence interventionists and case managers, and it essentially ends up being a criminal justice system analysis coupled with what my violence interrupters believe to be true from their community-based information. And so that weekly data and that rolling understanding of what's causing and driving violence in Oakland is how we make our strategic decisions.
How do you identify an effective community violence interrupter, and what is their role? What are they actually doing out there?
Yeah. So community violence interrupters are such a key part of this strategy. And again, they are folks that I want to say about 80 to 90% of them grew up in this city. They went to school here, they played Little League here, they hung out on the block here, they went to jail from here, they were on probation and parole here. All of their relationships and their understanding of the street and also of redemption and what that work looks like happened in an Oakland context. And so they're individuals who figured out, with the help of supports, like all of them, when you hear their stories, it's all about mentoring and supports and someone that believed in them when someone didn't have to believe in them and when they may not have been worthy in their minds of that belief or of that second chance. And so they're really committed to creating that space for other people. And they're doing their work through their networks, both the web and ecosystem of violence interrupters across the city working together, and the deep arms that they have to reach out in this city. I mean, if we review a shooting, we review our shootings each week, it's very rare that one of the violence interrupters doesn't either know the victim, the victim's mom, the victim's grandma, auntie, cousin, uncle. And so the work is really done, again, in community based on relationships of trust. And so the violence interrupters' main role is to identify the individuals involved, have an understanding of what the conflict was about in the first place, so that they can then use that intelligence about what drove the conflict to try to work with hopefully both sides of the conflict. Our goal is always to have violence interrupters that can reach out to each side of the conflict to get some peace agreement going.
So what's your message of inspiration to light the fire in the next youth?
So if you truly, because I was always a peaceful man, if you truly want to be peaceful, just be peaceful. Do the right things. Keep practicing that peace. Don't never let nobody take away your peace. No matter if you're in hard times or you're doing good, peace is something that's going to make you continue to do good.
Yeah.
And have trust in Allah that's going to make sure that you do it right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I was like so cringe moments, like as I'm doing the right thing, but Allah seen me through and keep doing that good thing just, really made me feel whole. Because that's all I wanted to be in the first place. I was a good person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love all this. I don't want to run around with no chip on my shoulder and look at people as an enemy or something like that. So I got all their support, from DAs to government officials. It's there.
Man.
And so I think that's really important when we're thinking about hiring, and why I put so much time into advocating inside the city for the hires that I make, because we're making non-traditional hires. The folks I'm hiring are not people that traditionally would have ever been able to make it past the city background. They would have never made it past the city risk management conversation. But we're showing that people with lived experience and criminal justice involvement in their past can make up a professional workforce of public safety staff members who really can support the city in being safer.
I think there's a lot of stereotypes about who people think is creating the violence,
Mm-hmm.
and often they contradict each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted you to just kind of dispel for our viewers some of the myths, like what is the, for lack of a better way to say it, what is the profile of the folks who are at the root of the violence in our communities, and how do you identify them in order to begin to engage them?
Yeah, great question. I think, this question, it demands of me to first answer the question of like who originally created violence in this country. I think that's really the important thing for us always to keep in mind, is that the country was built on violence, the country was built on theft, the country was built on rape and trafficking, and so what we're seeing now in our communities is the trauma that has resulted from the 400 years of violence perpetrated against us. And so I really try to think of my work as healing work. Like, how are we healing the 400 years of trauma that was perpetrated and continues to be perpetrated against our people? And I'll try to illustrate what I mean with a really quick story from when I was in the police department. So I was running the human trafficking unit and extremely committed to saving and supporting mostly women and girls of color, mainly Black women and girls, who were being trafficked and sold for sex all over the city, all over the Bay. And one particular instance, we had identified two 14-year-old girls who were being sex trafficked in the city of Oakland. And I went in the interview room and I interviewed one of the girls. And mind you, at this time, the city and the police department weren't really seeing Black women and girls as victims. They were having a really hard time seeing Black girls as victims. The adultification was happening, they're fast, they're choosing this life, all of that was the culture of the police department. And so I was in a very particular position to be fighting for the system to respond with a victim lens to Black girls. And so I'm interviewing this 14-year-old Black girl, and she's telling me her story. Like, how do we go from being in an 8th grade classroom to being pinned out on the streets of Oakland? And it was a story that I'd heard, dozens of times at that point. Child Protective Services since she was 4 years old, being taken out of the home, foster care, being locked up and arrested for her own victimhood, et cetera, et cetera. So I left there fire. And her exploiter was in the next interview room. And so I was ready to go into there and really interrogate this exploiter. He's going to prison. That was my mindset. And I walked in, and I think the young man was about 22, but he looked about 15. And it was a very baby-faced young Black man. And I sat down, getting ready to interrogate him. And he just broke down crying and told me his life story. And his life story was an exact mirror of hers. And in that moment, it was a completely disorienting dilemma. You can see I still get emotional about it because I grew up here and I should know that that was his story.
That unless we have the charging, what is the DA doing? Nothing. We're not involved unless we have a charge case, right? What systems are involved? We don't know. If we don't charge it at all, there's a victim who says, wait a minute, this person took my car and now I can't get my kids to work or to school. That's a valid concern. Now, whether that person will ever get restitution or not, I don't know. But what I do know is I can't say to the victims of those crimes, guess what? We're gonna pick and choose who we charge. At least if I get into the details about how we got there, we can have a better conversation about what we do after we charge.
So often you see people don't have really, really solid, adequate, effective representation when they're facing the punishment of the state and the government. There's all this leveraging and possibilities and even pressure for people to take deals, to resolve their cases. Statistically, throughout the nation, only 2% of cases end up going to trial. That means 98% plea bargain. They all deal. And so we got to ask ourselves the question, why do these cases deal? Because the way the system is set up is extremely coercive. It's extremely coercive. And we think about, people call it the criminal justice system. I never call it that. I call it the criminal legal system. Some of my friends call it the criminal punishment system because it really is about punishment as opposed to rehabilitation. So let's think about this. Where the case comes through, you get charged with a crime. Let's say it's, what do you want to be charged with? You can pick. You want to be charged with a murder, car theft? What do you want to be charged with?
How about bipping? Yes.
Okay. You broke into someone's car, stole their property. Okay. We'll say the DA has the discretion to charge it as a misdemeanor or felony. They're going to charge you with a felony, okay, because they have more leverage. Okay. They're going to say, you know what? You can get charged with this, and you can go to trial. You can get 3 years prison, or you can resolve your case, plead guilty, and get probation and maybe 30 days county jail. That's the way the system works. It's coercive. You might have a case where you are innocent, where you can actually prove your innocence. Let's say it's a more serious charge. Let's say it's murder. Okay, say you're charged with murder, looking at life in prison, and you want to go to trial and show that you're innocent. But the DA's like, oh, it's a weak case. Maybe you shouldn't go to trial. Maybe, no, we're going to offer you 5 years prison. What do you do in that situation? Do you risk serving the rest of your life in prison? Or do you plea bargain?
And that's where your expertise comes in.
That's where our expertise comes in. But when we're talking to a client in that situation, what do you think most clients do? What do you think you would do? I know what I would probably do.
I'm sweating thinking about it. Bird in the hand is better. I might take the 5, knowing if I don't, I could get life or something.
Exactly. So what people don't realize is that innocent people plead guilty all the time in the criminal legal system.
As a chief in the city of Oakland, and you interact with your fellow chiefs, one example, you talked about the weekly meeting at the mayor's office. I would imagine, and I wouldn't have to think too hard to imagine, if I were in that situation and was looking to self-select into a program that would provide me some support, I would be hesitant because I would be concerned. You're part of the city too. You're a chief, right? And so I'm concerned that if I divulge something to you, how do I know you're not going to use that against me? So I'm curious to know what's the communication flow? How do you engage with your fellow chiefs? And how does the communication and information flow? And is it flowing in both directions? Or is it sometimes a one-way communication?
Absolutely. The communication between the Department of Violence Prevention and the police department is always one way, always. And we're never talking to the police department alone. It's always at the mayor's meeting. So first of all, it's at the partnership table, it's at the mayor's weekly meeting, it's very structured. They're there to do their presentation on the weekly, what we call the weekly shooting review. I'm able to ask them questions. It doesn't work in reverse. And so once I have my understanding of what they believe to be true and who they believe is at the center of violence, I can take that information back to my team.
One of the things that led up to the creation of this national organization is I worked for many years as an advocate, as a direct service provider. I had the pleasure of being the executive director of a local organization, doing a lot of work in Oakland. And then I did something I didn't think I would ever do, is go, what I jokingly say, I went to the dark side of the force. I started working in the system, right? So I spent almost a decade working in the system in Washington, D.C., in New York City, back home here, where I was the chief probation officer. You know, had you told me when I was the executive director of the Mentoring Center that I would later be carrying a badge, I would have told you out of your mind, right? But my whole purpose of working on the inside was to transform the system. Right? It was never to be a bureaucrat. It was certainly never to be a law enforcement officer. Technically, I was that, right? And was happy to try to change the system from within, which I think is noble work. I did it for almost a decade. But now I've launched this organization 10 years ago now, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We've grown to be all over the country. We're in about 25 cities around the country. And we do two primary pieces of work: help change the justice system, adult and youth, but also help reduce violence. And so we focus on community violence intervention efforts, as well as citywide strategies to reduce violence. And some people think those two things are in conflict with one another, to try to reform the justice system and try to reduce violence, because we have a false mental model that the only way we could reduce gun violence is by more police and more incarceration, but that's not true. And so what we do in cities around the country is both help to improve their justice systems as well as establish effective gun violence strategies.
What are some detention alternatives that you've identified either through the research or through your own work that you lift up in order to reduce violence in communities?
So I think one of the greatest examples is a program which is intended to be a strategy and a way we administer the justice system that we started first here in Oakland. It's called the NOAB, the Neighborhood Opportunity and Accountability Board. And so it is a juvenile diversion program. So when young people are arrested by the Oakland Police Department, instead of sending them to the detention center, instead of sending them to probation to get processed to be charged, they send them to us. And I think it's a perfect example because it's a partnership with the police department, right? Our referrals come directly from police officers, and our agreement was these are young people who would otherwise go through the system, because we don't want to net widen. We don't want to take a young person who they were going to counsel and release anyway and then send into more stuff to make it difficult for them to get out of the system. And so these are young people primarily arrested for felonies. And once the police department actually became more comfortable with the process, they started sending us cases I never imagined they would, carjacking cases, gun cases, because they became comfortable with something's gonna happen with this young person. We're going to engage them intensively. We're going to engage their family. And so the NOAB, the Neighborhood Opportunity and Accountability Board, is young people, instead of going to court, but they don't understand the process, language is being said that their families don't understand, they get a consequence maybe months and months later after the behavior, that this is swift, it's much more certain, and it's much more community grounded. So they come before a group of community leaders. And so the board is a group of community leaders, and the A in NOAB is accountability. So there is still discussion around why did you engage in this behavior? How can we correct this behavior? But also not what's everything bad with you, but how can we build on your strengths? The justice system over decades became about what's wrong with you? How can we fix you? Or what did you do wrong? How can we punish you? It really should be about how can we build on your strengths? How can we address the needs and challenges and, yes, hold accountable, but let's connect you to community. And the NOAB has been incredibly successful. Very few young people get rearrested for anything, certainly hardly anything serious, and we've continued to receive a number of referrals from the police department.
I'm really thinking a little bit about the data. And, typically we've had a conversation with the district attorney, we've had a conversation with the chief of violence prevention, and part of what comes up, one of the measurements or metrics that they use to say the system is working is recidivism. And obviously that's a goal you just talked about, not coming back into the system. But what are some other potential measures that we could use beyond just recidivism, right? So recidivism says you're not incarcerated or no longer in the system. It doesn't say you're thriving. It doesn't say you're housed. And so what are some other measures that you think we should be focused on to know if the system is working effectively?
So a couple things we have to understand. One is recidivism is a measure. It's not the only measure. And I think it is an important measure, but it can never be the only measure. But what is healthy? What is thriving? So the base level is you're not committing more crimes. By the way, there's a lot of people who get rearrested and reincarcerated who never commit another crime. Right? They violate the terms of their supervision. And people call that recidivism. It's not a new crime, right? I did not see my PO on time, or I skipped a meeting with my PO. I didn't finish this program. People get reincarcerated for that, and we count it as recidivism. If the general public thinks of recidivism as committing another crime again, that's a better standard. Again, should never be the only. But also, how are you doing? Housing, employment, education, mental health, drug treatment. Do you have all of your basic needs? You have your birth certificate and your ID, your driver's license, and everything you need to be able to get a job and get housing. That basic stuff that many of us take for granted is incredibly important. Probation is a practice that has been proven to be ineffective, right? And has for many long years have been about trail 'em, nail 'em, and jail 'em. We're gonna catch you doing something wrong and lock you up. Now, thankfully, there's been a lot of reforms over the year. Alameda County's probation system has significantly changed. Not perfect, but significantly changed. But there's still many systems in the country that are still trail 'em, nail 'em, jail 'em.
How would you define justice?
Justice, I think about balance. You know, if there's an injustice, things have to be corrected. You know what I mean?
Whatever's morally right.
When I think of justice, I think of people getting what they deserve and getting what is true to them and allows them to have autonomy.
If you take something, it should be restored, right? If you harm someone, then you need to deal with the consequences of that action.
Yep.
Right on, right on.
And there are so many ways that our legal system is fucked and that people do not bring justice to others with legal decisions specifically, I'd say.
Do you think that justice is delivered equally in Oakland or in the East Bay?
No, I don't think we find justice equally delivered anywhere in America, right? And I don't think we will find it because the people that are trying to give justice have started off on a footing of committing crime. So it's kind of like going to a mafia boss and asking for him to give you justice where his position of power was built on crime.
On injustice.
On injustice, yeah.
Man, some good shit right there, bro.
From the DA to the public defender and the judge, it's got to be something equal to where he can say, I was done properly through that stage, now I can heal myself. If you give a person a jacked up sentence, all he's gonna do is try to figure out how to keep fighting, not working on himself while he's in prison. So the laws is just. All these big amount of years, 300 years, 400 years for one incident that a person does, they gotta start looking at that, because who does that serve? I cannot say as an offender myself what time does a victim need, but so many years to where this kid grows up to be gray and old and wrinkled, that's not good for nobody.
Yeah.
I feel like this, man. If I'm a taxpayer, I'm paying money towards something, prisons and stuff like that, where's my return?
It's a real question.
My return is making sure that that young man come out here and be able to serve the community. Right. And if he don't be able to do that because he's so mad at the world going through prison, then we get nothing back. Our money was just used up for nothing. You know what I mean?
I think that justice has to be defined by the people who are in the system. So I think oftentimes we think about justice from the perspective of someone who's been charged with a crime and who is going through the criminal justice process. But unless we are having the dual conversation about the victims who are victims of crime, we can't ever come to any kind of agreement about what justice is. It's the conversation I've had many times about restorative justice. If the victim's not in the room, then what are you restoring? Who are we restoring? And so for me, justice is about making sure that both parts of the equation, both the victim and the people charged with the crime, are moving through a fair and just system. And that, that they feel heard, both sides. And that they feel supported, both sides. Every defendant has a right to a lawyer. And to some extent, the DA stands in the gap for victims in that way as well, because this is a difficult scenario for anybody involved. And I think that oftentimes we forget that victims don't have a lawyer assigned to them. The DA works for the people of the state of California, which means to some extent we work for both sides, right? But we are advocates for victims, and we have to be. So justice is an equation. Everybody's at the table.
Justice to me means you have to balance the interests of everyone who is involved in it. You got to make sure that you're following the Constitution. Victims have a constitutional amendment, which means that victims have a right to know what is happening with the case, how that case is going to be prosecuted. Too often, prosecutors, as much as they say they care about victims, they don't really follow the law with respect to victims, because that's hard, that's work, right? And I represented victims for 30 years, so I know being with people in their worst moment is not easy. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of trauma. That trauma can become part of how you feel. It is traumatizing to prosecutors every day. And they see it. They see the worst thing that has happened to people, and they have to hold their hand. And so it's important that in that role that you remember that you are the guardian of the Constitution for all the community. And your role is to make sure that the punishment fits the crime.
I'll be honest with you, when I think of justice, I don't like that word because as it's used normally, it's something I am opposed to for several things. Like we talked about the criminal justice system. I don't think there isn't justice in the current legal system. So I remove saying justice there. And the popular way to use that word justice is really law enforcement. It's really tough on crime. That's what it means to a lot of people, and that's not what it means to me. So when I hear justice at times, I cringe at that word. But when I think about what justice really should mean, it should mean a sense of fairness, right? It should mean that no matter if you're black or white or poor or man or a woman or gay or lesbian or whatever, you get treated the exact same way in the criminal legal system.
Town Sounds with Baba Moshe's Bantaba Drum Call.
Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, Nigeria became the slave ships. And if you touch the drum, they'll jack you up. Seriously, you've seen some of the things they did to the black people, the Africans back in the day. So for us to be playing drums like this right now is a blessing. If they knew rather their culture, they would be doing this. If they knew a little bit more about where they came from, they have a little bit more empathy and compassion around hurting others for a little money and different things like that. That's why we do what we do. We're not just drumming to drum. We drumming to uplift the lives of others, from the preschoolers all the way up to the senior citizens. Respect?
This wraps up our three-part series, highlighting local stories, community leaders, and those seeking to serve Oakland. One of our goals is to make sure you stay informed. We know that every opportunity to vote is an opportunity to change our future. We look forward to seeing you again on the other side of the primaries June 2nd. Hopefully, I'll see you at the ballot box. This is Brother Saleem signing off. remember to share, like, and subscribe. And if you haven't already, make sure you register to vote. Check out the link below.
Civic engagement is community building, and it's only successful when we put aside our own self-interest and move to a more collective health and well-being for our community. It's only when we all have access to, and I mean all, have access to the levers of power that democracy really works. Thank you for listening, and keep an eye out for our fall edition of Real Talk About the Town. Thanks for watching.
Now, where y'all gonna be airing that, on Channel 7 or something?